Hello everyone and welcome to our presentation. Today we will be presenting a talk called A Process Model for Minimizing Adverse Effects when using head-mounted display-based virtual reality for individuals with autism. My name is Matthew Schmidt. I'm an associate professor at the University of Florida, and I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues Nigel Newbutt at the University of the West of England in the UK, Carla Schmidt, also at the University of Florida, and Noah Glazer at the University of Connecticut. Let's get started. So today we're going to briefly provide an overview of autism. We will talk about the potential of virtual reality and autism. We will also present some of the gaps in the literature, as well as a problem related to adverse effects that are associated with VR. And we will present a process model that we have developed in order to reduce these potential adverse effects. We'll talk about the process that we underwent to develop our model, and we will finish with implications. So let's talk a little bit about autism spectrum disorder. So ASD is a cluster of neurodevelopmental disorders, and they are characterized as restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior, as well as deficits in social communication and social interaction. In the US, the prevalence is going up. We see about 1 in 54 children being diagnosed, and this is not so different than the UK, where we're seeing 1 in 68 being diagnosed. ASD is often diagnosed with comorbidities such as epilepsy, ADHD, anxiety disorders, and so on. And it is a spectrum disorder. What that means is that there is substantial heterogeneity between one person and another. If you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. Now, autism can severely impact an individual's independent functioning, and if it is left untreated, it can exacerbate employment problems, one's ability to live independently, and social isolation. So ultimately, just quality of life in general.
Over the past few decades, researchers have been continuously interested in the use of virtual reality as a way of providing learning and instructional platforms for individuals with autism. This is because this technology holds a variety of affordances that seem to align to the unique needs of individuals with autism, such as the ability to manipulate and provide a high degree of experimental control and evolution to provide these individualized contexts that can evolve from these concrete to more abstract scenarios, which has a lot of implications related to generalization. It also allows for the use of these head-mounted displays, which can help promote these ideas of telepresence, with research suggesting that if users are able to feel more physically immersed or psychologically there and present within the environment, then the actions that participate in within a virtual environment can take on a deeper meaning and transfer out into the real world. However, there are a number of gaps that remain in the literature, especially concerning the use of these head-mounted displays for people with autism. Up until around 2016, virtual reality head-mounted displays were simply too expensive and not readily available for use. With the advent of devices such as the Oculus Rift, researchers now have access to these affordable and more reliable devices than ever before. But because of this, before 2016, the vast majority of research for people with autism using virtual reality was conducted on these desktop-based systems, where instead of being within a headset, they were controlling their avatar with a keyboard and mouse. These headsets are unfortunately often associated with adverse effects such as cyber sickness, where people who use them tend to feel sick. And there's gaps in the literature because the vast majority of this research has been conducted on people who are neurotypical and not those with cognitive disabilities or sensory processing disorders, such as individuals with autism. So we simply do not know how people with autism would experience these kinds of adverse effects. Further gaps are related to the fact that people who do use these devices in their research are not reporting on the implementation procedures or any kinds of evidence of adverse effects, such as cyber sickness.
So I'm briefly going to introduce the United Kingdom based study. Here we worked in England, actually, within the South and Southwest region, and we worked with a range of autistic and typically developing children aged from 6 to 16, and we worked in 4 schools with over 40 pupils. We also included teachers in our study with a view to gain their insights and inputs to the use of the VR technology. In terms of the apparatus we used both sort of low, mid, and high-tech options, which I'll share with you on the next slide. And we worked with Google Cardboard with smartphone device, and we worked with the HTC at the two extremes, low and high tech. For the virtual environments, we actually worked with off-the-shelf software. So these weren't pieces of software that were designed by the team, but they were already existing software that included examples focused around historical environments, socially sort of focused environments, and also simulation experiences for the users and the pupils. And really the purpose of this project was to evaluate how that technology could be used in the school, what types of technology could be used best in the schools. And again, those insights were gained from the pupils and from the teachers predominantly. But most importantly, we wanted to learn from the pupils what and where and how this technology could be usefully deployed and used for them in their school. Moving on to the type of technology, as I mentioned, we use sort of very high-tech technology, which was the HTC Vive. And we worked with a sort of a mid-end technology, which was the Class VR, and we worked with a sort of a low-tech option, which was the Google Cardboard device with a smartphone inserted into that. So for the Google, just as an example, for the sort of Google Cardboard and smart device environment, we use some moonscapes, we use some other historical walkthrough environments for the users to experience. And as you can see on the top right image here, we also use some historical environments, and these were limited actually to 360 video content in the Class VR headset. And then when we moved into the HTC option, we used environments that actually involved input options. So the use of the hand controllers, were able to be used by the users in terms of interacting in that environment and actually physically moving around that space. So there were quite a lot of differences between what we use, and that was purposefully done because we wanted to really ascertain across this sort of spectrum of technologies which might be most appropriate and used in that setting.
To address these gaps in the literature, we have examined two studies that took place, one in the United States and two in the United Kingdom, that explored the use of these virtual reality head-mounted displays for individuals with autism. So now I want to quickly talk to you about the study that took place in the United States. For this study, researchers developed a public transportation simulation that was modeled around a university setting that an adult day program interacted within. The participants of the study were young adults with autism in that day program, aging from around 23 to 34 years old. And we also included a number of expert evaluators with different backgrounds in the field. When users interacted within this environment, they did so through what we refer to as the lower tech Google Cardboard and the Google Daydream and the higher tech HTC Vive. Now we say lower tech and higher tech because part of this virtual reality intervention approach was that we would transition them from these video-based scenarios where they would have skills modeled to them to a higher tech VR-based, fully immersive environment where they would practice the skills while controlling an avatar in that replication of the university setting. To give a little more context, this is kind of what that looks like. What we refer to as Virtuoso SVVR is this lower tech environment where users could click on a series of videos that were chunked into these small digestible snippets that would have the skills modeled to them. And that we actually went out into campus, recorded ourselves with these 360-degree cameras, modeling the skills related to catching a bus on the university setting. And then the Virtuoso VR that you see in the bottom right corner is a full recreation of the entire university where users could practice those skills that they had modeled to them in the Virtuoso SVVR environment.
As you can see, there are some pretty clear similarities between the work that Nigel and his group were doing and the work that myself and Noah and our group were doing. So it was on the basis of this that we decided we would take a much closer look at just what exactly we had done. To this end, we applied qualitative case study methodology across 3 phases to identify what those similarities might be and to distill that into themes that we could then potentially use to communicate to practitioners and researchers alike. The result of our qualitative inquiry is what you see on the screen now. Here we have the distillation of the themes that emerged from our work. We arranged these themes using the metaphor of stage production or theater. As you can see, we have 4 stages, and each one of these stages is linear and builds upon the lessons learned of the previous stage. Much like stage production, in stage 1, setting the stage, what we're doing is we are trying to understand the specifics of the local context by acquiring input from stakeholders and participants so that we can really attune the experience to those local needs. In stage 2, dress rehearsal, we're going to try out the technology in the local context with the facilitators to make sure that our procedures are going to work. So, for example, we might be testing our checklists, we might be testing our setup, we might be testing whether the software works correctly, whether our hardware works correctly, and so on. The purpose here is to make sure that we're not having errors, and if we are, we can identify them, we can fix them, and then we can move to the next stage. The next stage, first preview, is when participants actually get hands-on with the technology. They get to touch it, feel it, explore it, put on the head-mounted displays, and they can experience the virtual environment so in a 2D context, either with videos or they can try it on a desktop display so that they can understand what it is that they are going to be getting involved with. This is so that we can reduce uncertainty and increase familiarity, as well as provide very concrete details for our participants about what it is that they've consented to, and to make sure that they are still willing to continue after the fact. And it is at that point that we move into stage 4, opening night, which is of course when you go live in stage production. Our opening night consists of 2 acts. In Act 1, what we're doing is we're providing a limited experience with virtual reality using a limited headset such as a Google Cardboard and virtual environments that are less immersive such as 360-degree video. And the purpose of this is to provide a context in which the participants can acclimate to the technology, while at the same time allowing us, the researchers, to observe for any adverse effects, as well as when they're finished to ensure that they are still willing to continue. And finally, in Act 2, this is when we go live with our intervention. We allow the participants to experience the fully immersive headset-based virtual reality experience with tools of higher complexity software environments that are highly immersive and engaging. And it's at this point that we have the reasonable assurance or expectation that our participants' experiences are going to be safe, enjoyable, and are going to produce the lowest amount of adverse effects that we can reasonably expect. As you can see, over time, we assert that the potential for adverse effects go down as we acclimate to the context and as our participants acclimate to the technology. We now turn to research implications. The work that we've presented here addresses a number of research gaps. For example, there is a lack of guidelines for utilizing head-mounted display-based virtual reality for individuals with autism. This work begins to address that gap. In addition, there's a paucity of research that considers adverse effects, although many researchers contend that adverse effects is an area that warrants further consideration in this research area. And finally, there's little reporting of adverse effects themselves, and we encourage future researchers to be aware and to implement procedures that could potentially diminish these adverse effects. In terms of ethical ramifications, many of the ethics boards which govern our work would contend that when you're working with vulnerable populations, you have an increased obligation to reduce any sort of negative outcomes. We have intentionally included stakeholders and participants in our process so as to ensure that potential negative outcomes can be reduced. Ultimately, this puts users at the center of our processes as opposed to research outcomes. And this is important because it is central to developing safe working practices with individuals with autism and for individuals with autism. We maintain that an ethical perspective is critical moving forward in this research area, and we encourage other researchers pursuing similar research lines to consider ethics as well. And on that note, we conclude our talk, and we would like to thank everyone for coming today. On the screen again are my collaborators. Should you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us using the QR code on the screen.